What's up, guys? Happy Thursday. So, hey, we're going to keep on solving quadratic equations. We're going to learn a new method today, all right? So, Monday, we learned how to solve by square roots. Tuesday, we learned how to factor, right? Then Wednesday, we practiced these two. Today, we're going to learn the infamous quadratic formula. Let's go ahead and take a look at it. So, here it is. Looks super scary, looks super intimidating, but once we give it a shot and once we learn it, I promise you guys got this. You're going to use this a lot in algebra too, so it's a good thing to go ahead and get your mind kind of wrapped around. Um, at first, just give it your best shot. It gets easier the more and more you use it. So we use the quadratic formula to solve quadratic equations, right? And we use it to solve quadratic equations that look like this, right? In standard form, ax squared plus bx plus c, and this is super important, it's got to equal 0. All right, remember that from Tuesday with solving by factoring. Again, it's got to equal 0 for us to use the quadratic formula. So here it is. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, right? 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. All right. So that's what it is. Looks super complicated, but it's really nice because we can use it to solve any quadratic formula we want. Okay. As long as it is in this form. And what are all these letters? Well, obviously, these letters come from A, B, and C in standard form, right? So if you know A, B, and C, you plug them in here, put it in the calculator, and you got your answers. So, before we jump into using this, let me show you a quick review problem, and it's going to help lead us into using the quadratic formula. So let's solve this quadratic equation by factoring, right? So I know I can't solve it by square root because I've got an x term, right? It's in standard form and it equals 0. So I know I'm good to go by factoring. So I know it's going to be x times something, x and something times x and something, right? And because a is 1. So I just got to figure out what these two numbers are. What are the two numbers that multiply to negative 16 and add to 6? What's positive 8 and negative 2, right? So again, if you remember, our next step would be to split up these two factors, because the idea here is if this times this equals 0, then either x plus 8 equals 0 or x minus 2 equals 0, right? This is the part some of y'all were forgetting on the practice, so make sure that you got this, okay? So solve each one of those equations. Here I'm going to subtract 8 from both sides, and I've got x equals negative 8. Add 2 to both sides here. I've got x equals 2. Okay, here are my two answers, my two solutions to the problem, right? And hopefully you guys remember that these are our x-intercepts of this equation, right? Because we're trying to see where y is 0. So that means they have x-intercepts of negative 8, 0, and 2, 0. So that was solving a quadratic equation by factoring. Now, let's solve the same quadratic equation using the quadratic formula, and I'll show you that we'll get the same answer, right? So here it is again. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. All right. So all we got to do to be able to fill this out is know what a, b, and c are, right? And obviously we get those straight from the equation. It's in standard form and it equals 0. So now I know I'm good to go using the quadratic formula. A is 1, b is 6, c is negative 16. Make sure you're keeping in mind the signs, right? So I know a, I know b, I know c. Now let's go ahead and plug this all into the quadratic formula. So start with x equals, right? X equals, and then draw yourself a big fraction bar, right? So first thing we need is negative b, right? In other words, take the sign of b and make it opposite. So b is positive 6 here. Negative b is obviously negative 6. And then we've got this plus or minus right here. Remember how on Monday we were doing solving by square roots? We need the positive and negative square root. It's kind of the same idea here. So plus or minus the square root of, and once we start working this out, I'll show you how to handle this. So plus or minus the square root of b squared. So b is 6, so make that 6 squared. Always put this part in parentheses, okay? Because when this is negative, if you don't put it in parentheses in the calculator, it's going to give you the wrong answer. So be mindful of that. We've talked about that though. So b squared minus 4. It's always going to be a 4 in there. Sometimes people ask me, where'd the 4 come from? That's just part of the formula, right? It's always going to be 4 times a, which is 1, right? Times a, which is 1 in this case, times c, which is negative 16. And all of that's going to be over 2 times a. Again, this is always going to be 2. 2 times a, which in this case is 1, right? So that looks like a mess, doesn't it? That looks a little scary. But the good news is if you've got your calculator, you type this mess in the calculator and let it do all the work for you, okay? So let's go ahead and do that. Take out your calculator, right? And let's type in what we got. So go ahead and start out with your fraction button and type in negative b, which in this case was b was 6, so negative 6, right? Negative b. Now this is the part where we got to talk about plus or minus. That's two different operations, right? Which means we're going to have to do this twice. Once with plus, once with minus. All right. So starting out, I'm just going to do the plus first, and then I'll go back and do the minus the next time because I'm going to have two answers, right? So plus the square root of b squared, well, b is 6. So 6 squared, remember, always put that in parentheses, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which was negative 16. So again, I'm just typing into the calculator what we wrote out down there, right? So we've got the top part, and then all over 2 times a, which was 1. Let's see what we get. We get 2. Remember, that was one of our solutions, right? So we're already off to a good start, right? So one of my solutions is x equals 2. Let's find the other one. Hopefully the other one is negative 8, right? That's what we got last time. Let's see. So we just did the plus. Now we're going to go back and do the minus. So if you're using one of these calculators, the easiest way to go back is not to retype everything. Highlight it, press enter, and scroll over until you get to that sign that you need to change, right? So the plus and minus right here, we did plus. Now change it to a minus. Press enter. Look what we got, negative 8. That's what we were hoping for, right? X equals 2 and x equals negative 8. Because if you look back here, isn't that what we had here? X equals 2, x equals negative 8. So we used the quadratic formula, and we got the same answer that we did when we factored, right? Now, that brings up a question that maybe a lot of you guys are thinking right now. Why in the world would I ever do this when I can do this, right? And that's a fair question because a lot of people prefer factoring to using quadratic formula, right? Some people actually do like this better once they get the hang of it. But I get that question a lot. Why would you need this? Well, the only issue is, what if I give you a problem that you can't factor? Then we can't use factoring, right? We can't use square root because we've got an x term. That means we're going to have to use the quadratic formula, okay? So if you're looking at this problem right here, right? What two numbers multiply to 3 and add to negative 5? There's no numbers we can think of that multiply to 3 and add to negative 5. So we can't factor. That's why we need the quadratic formula, right? So let's go ahead and kind of identify what's A, what's B, and what's C. A is obviously 1 again, right? B, in this case, is negative 5, and C is 3, right? So A is 1, B is -5, 3 is C. Let's plug all this into the quadratic formula and let's get our answer. We'll do it a little bit quicker this time. X equals, draw yourself a big fraction bar, and let's fill in what we got, right? So this is the part where you gotta be careful of signs. Negative B, right? Negative B. Well, if B is already -5, -5 is what? +5, right? So you're always gonna put the opposite sign of whatever B is here. B is -5, so negative B is +5, right? Plus or minus the square root of B squared. Well, B is -5, right? So remember, super important. Put this in parentheses. -5 squared minus 4 times A times C. So the formula always has the 4, right? A is 1, C is 3. And we just filled in the top. And on the bottom, we need 2 times A. Again, it's always going to be 2 right here. And in this case, A is 1. So we just filled this out. Let's plug it into the calculator and let's get our answers, right? Pull that calculator up. So start with your fraction button. Negative B, right? B was -5, so negative B is +5. Again, with the plus and the minus, we got to do those 2 separate times. I'm going to start with the plus, right? The square root of B squared. B is -5, so I have to put -5 in parentheses right here. Y'all see that? Squared minus 4 times A, which is 1, times C, which is +3, right? All over 2 times A, which is 1. Press enter. Look what we got. The square root of 13 plus 5 over 2. That's a messy number, right? Obviously, that makes sense because we couldn't factor what we were dealing with, so we knew we were going to get kind of a weird number, right? The way I want you guys to handle this, let's just write it as a decimal. So if you remember, the way to change it to a decimal is to hit the button right above enter, that toggle button right there, the one with the 2 arrows. 4.3. So we're going to write our first answer, x equals 4.3. That means one of our x-intercepts is 4.3 comma 0, right? This quadratic function crosses the x-axis at 4.3. Now we got to find the other x value, right? We did the plus. Now let's go back and do the minus. And again, instead of having to type all that mess in, go up and highlight the work, scroll over, right? Go to the plus, change it to a minus. This is going to give us our second answer. -13 plus 5 over 2, right? Let's go ahead and toggle that, change it to a decimal by hitting the button right above enter. 0.697. I'm going to round that to 0.70. And those are my 2 answers. So here's why we need the quadratic formula, because we could not factor this. We couldn't solve it by square root, but we use our trusty quadratic formula and we get our answers, right? It's as easy as plugging things in and plugging it into the calculator. So, hey, go to Canvas, practice this. Don't put the pressure on yourself to be amazing at it the first day. Just get practice using it, and I promise the more you use it, the better you'll get at it. Again, reach out if you need help or if you got questions. And yeah, have an awesome rest of your day.